sometime last year, I got to thinking what it was I loved about startups, and I realized it kind of goes back 10 years. In 2005, I started working for ESPN, and I became known as a new product strategist or new product marketing strategist or new product launch strategist. And so what companies would pay me to do is to come visit them. I get to go on some really cool trips. And they would have me advise them on what they saw as their new slate of products. And invariably, what they thought were great products typically weren't. I remember going to a Fortune 50 that really changed my perspective and really opened my eyes about startups. I remember sitting down talking to the CEO, and there were 1,100 new products. And I said to the PR person, can I be honest with them? And he said, absolutely. So I said, I think this is a mistake because every year you guys launch 1,100 new products. Of those, maybe 50 stick, and there's a lot of staff cuts, there's a lot of money wasted. So next morning I had breakfast with the global marketing director, and we went through what I thought was an effective marketing strategy. They didn't listen to me. They've struggled ever since. But it gave me my sea legs, so to speak, to a level of comfort with startups and being able to advise them on the things that they need to do. It also helped me from the standpoint of better understanding what helps startups be successful. And what I say, it's never the product or the service, it's always the people. And so that's when I work with a startup, the first thing I look for is to make sure they have the right butts in the seats. No matter how great the product or service is, it's not going to be successful without those. And so today I figured I'd start, I wanted to talk about developing a community, but the right place to start in developing a community is talking about where that begins. I've been reading a lot of Steve Jobs books, and I'm not so much attracted to him for his genius, but kind of for to be able to avoid some of the mistakes he made. This is the team he left Apple with when he was ousted. This is the employees he left with, and these are dev and design folks, a salesperson, and this was an amazing team. But Steve Jobs had hundreds of millions of dollars to invest on the next computer platform, and he ran roughshod over this entire team as he did with the entire industry and as he did with the staff at Apple. He ran them ragged, and he eventually lost them. And the reason why he lost them, every single person on here left, and next never became the next thing. But the reason why they left was because they couldn't deal with him. But the reason why they couldn't deal with him is he put the product and the service over the people. He had an amazing team. And so what I want to say is build a great team around you. That's the beginnings of an awesome community. The next thing I want to talk about is a book I read this past summer called From Zero to One. And it highlights how you typically want to be, when you're starting a company, don't think of a ginormous community, a ginormous audience to cater to. You want to start very, very small because, and I agree with Peter Thiel's philosophy, that the better you are at servicing a small group, that expands out. It doesn't help if you start too broad and you start trying to cater to everybody. You never get really good at anything, and that goes back to what we talked about yesterday. And I really believe in that. I believe in when you start small, you have the time to build the intensity needed to sustain you. And that's what I've seen with every startup I've ever worked with that was successful. They typically focus on a very, very small market. They got really good at servicing that market, and they found other people or were able to service other businesses with needs similar to those. And I think that's a huge key that most people miss. And I think I was missing it until I read this book, or at least I couldn't synthesize it in the right way. Informationally. The other thing is community over audience, and this is a big one. We hear all the time about how important audience is. Audience is not near as important as we think. When we think about it, audience is a wide swath of people who may or may not be interested in your community. A community are people who are invested in you, your products, and your services. And this is an example. This is one of the most successful blogs in our industry. And this is Buffer, the social media platform. But last year they wrote a blog and they admitted that they had lost half of their social traffic. And I just got to fishing around and thinking about it and talked to one of the people at the company, talked to some people at Moz, and I said, here's what I think happened there. They had a really broad audience. They had great content that catered to that audience, but they never focused on building a community. And so what happens is more and more platforms started sharing similar content that was just as good. some of those people decided not to come back to Buffer. And I think that's a mistake that we make all the time, what we don't understand. There's only a small segment of these people who are reading our blog each day who will interact with our product in any meaningful level, to any meaningful degree. And what happens is you pay too much attention to one thing at the detriment of the most important thing. And that's what I don't want us to do. And a great example of that is, and we were talking about email earlier, by and large, from your audience, only 2.5% of the people who get your emails, your social media updates, or any content you share will read or interact with it in any shape, form, or fashion. So they may see it in their email inbox, but by and large, they won't pay much attention to it. And that's that audience we're talking about. So if we focus on community and focus on doing what we can to help them do better what they already do. So many times we think of it from a product or service standpoint, and we say, oh, here's our amazing product, and it's going to totally revolutionize their lives. That's thinking too broadly. Think of it in terms of, here's what they're trying to accomplish. Here's how I can help them better do their jobs. And I think of it from the standpoint, every fitness trainer or nutritionist or every business I've ever hired, I've always thought of it as, here's this great version of me that exists out there somewhere. This is what I want to get to. I'm not comparing myself to this person or these entities out there that I have no interest in being in, likely will never be able to be anyway. But if a brand can help me do better what I'm already endeavoring to do, I'm willing to invest in them. And this is a quote that a friend of mine shared in a client presentation, and it really opened my eyes. I didn't know where it came from. This is a professor at an Ivy League institution. But people don't buy quarter-inch bits, they buy quarter-inch holes. And that's true. When I go to a store, I have a very specific need. I'm not buying what that store offers, and that goes back to the product or service that you sell isn't the reason why they're coming to you. It's if I could walk into Lowe's, it's because I like Lowe's and they offer that solution. And that's the way we have to think, and not in terms of that I'm the solution or my product or service solution. I'm allowing them to define the solution, and I'm a part of that. And I think that's what people are expecting from us, that we can help them do better what they already endeavor to do. Another is be human. People connect with people. This goofy guy, Will It Blend? You've seen the commercials where he puts marbles and magnets and all iPhones and all that in this blender. Became very significant to me. This is the CEO. Most people who don't even know this brand know this person. He's all over YouTube. But a couple of years ago, I went through 11 blenders in 1 year. I like smoothies, but I like really hard frozen fruit. And these blender I tried, I would burn it up. And so again, I was on my 12th in 1 year. I started seeing this video on YouTube, doing some investigation, and I realized, you know what? The problem is frozen fruit. Most engines aren't equipped to handle it. Well, here's simple marketing strategies. It'll blend anything. It's a 3 horsepower engine. It's not the most developed, it's not the most advanced machine, but I don't have to worry about will it blend frozen fruit. The attraction to that was his personality. I wouldn't have been attracted to it. I wasn't attracted to Vitamite and some of the others because they didn't have that resonant personality. And that's important when you're trying to build a community. Have something or someone people can associate with. Give them something to root for. This is Maz's robot, Roger. And one of the things I've advised companies on numerous occasions is to have a mascot. And many times they'll poo-poo that idea. Oh, that's silly. It's just going to be the CEO or the CMO and the CFO. And I said, but you guys don't have the personality. You're not interested in marketing yourself. But if you can have something that you can hand out as a little trinket or on a card that people can associate with a positive feeling, that's that positive ubiquity we talked about yesterday, it goes a long way. And when I think about it, Roger, the mascot for Maz, is in many ways more important or more noticeable, more significant in from that standpoint than Maz in and of itself. People who don't even know Maz know Roger, the Maz bot, as they call him. It's so significant. The lines are very long at any event he's at. And I think we can do the same thing. These types of mascots, these types of creatures, even if it's a human, can go a long way at extending the reach of your brand. And that's what I think we have to think about. It's not just about a product or service. And the next is to delight them with content. And I'm a content person, so this is very self-serving. But I think about this. This is a website done by Hilton Hotel, Hilton Suggests, and you may be familiar with it, but this is their Twitter profile. So if you're in a city and you have a hotel-related question, you get on Twitter and you ask it, even if you're not staying at a Hilton product, they'll answer the question, and it's amazing. They're so receptive. They're so amenable to answering your questions. Even though I'm not loyal to Hilton, to the brand. If I'm traveling, I will have this up prominently on my iPhone or my iPad or my laptop, because if I do have a question, if I'm not just looking in Google Maps, or if I'm not just looking in using Siri or Google, I'll ask them a question. And what you'll see is they're notorious for creating that positive ubiquity, because anytime somebody has a question, even at a competitor, or even not even about a hotel, it's about a restaurant, they're there to answer it. And so it puts that person in their wheelhouse, and puts their brand in that person's wheelhouse from the standpoint of all of a sudden Hilton's top of mind for the next day. This is something that was really cool. Recently, BMW celebrated their 100th birthday, and BMW celebrated their 100th birthday, and Mercedes-Benz created this little video celebrating the competition. Now, does that mean that somebody who's a Mercedes-Benz fan is going to go out and buy a BMW? Absolutely not. But this is that bridging of an audience to hopefully form part of their community. A lot of people who buy one or both of those brands aren't necessarily loyal to the other. They see them as one and the same. But what happens is all of a sudden you have all these people sharing it, and I guarantee you not all those people who are sharing it at the bottom, those thousands of people sharing it, are not Mercedes-Benz fans or BMW fans. They're likely just car enthusiasts. And so those are the types of things that we can do to increase our reach and go from audience to community. Another is use content to promote loyalty. Recently, Parsley, a network, an audience platform for publishers, studied thousands of publishers and billions of publisher pages. And what they found was, by and large, only 11% of publishers had people who were loyal to their brand from a content perspective. And loyalty is defined by a person coming back 5 times or more per month. To me, as a content person, that is an important metric, because if you're in a very competitive vertical, which most of us are, if you can get 15% of your readers to become loyal, that's 1.5 times what the competitor is doing, and very likely multiples of what the competitor is doing. These were some pretty advanced brands that they were dealing with. Most people don't have people visiting their blog 5 times a week. If they do that, you should be considering them a community. But when we think about going from audience to community, that number becomes very significant. And there's a lot of ways you can look to find the types of content that could be shared to move from audience to community. Here's something that we learned a little bit about yesterday, where it's a publication, but it's being done a little different, very different from what John Deere is doing with Furrow. This is a brand that's creating I think it's L'Oreal, that's creating a brand that multiple content providers can provide. They're sharing anything related to fashion, artistry, and beauty, that no matter the brand. So what happens is all these people who may be loyal to Dooney Burke or whatever hairdresser or chemical a person would use in their hair, they would come to this website to learn about various types of hair design or nail design. So what happens is you're expanding. My problem with Furrow and John Deere, and it's a great example, but the people interacting with that are already going to be loyal to John Deere. So where's the reach there? But if you can pull in people who may be loyal to other brands and say, hey, you know what? I know you're loyal to BMW, I know you're loyal to Mercedes, but hey, here's something we offer that they don't. It works both ways. So no matter the brand that sets up something similar to this, it opens up people's eyes to, oh, wow. It's not heavily marketed. There is no ads here that highlight who's doing this. So it opens up the platform for everybody. However, it's showing up on their domain, and that's something we have to think about from an SEO perspective. Even if you're sharing competitors' content, and I know a lot of people don't cotton to that idea. Even if you're showing competitors' content, if it's showing up on your domain and it's getting all this great reach, that's benefiting you. Not from a, quote, branding perspective, but from an organic reach perspective and from a community building perspective. That's huge. And so I think we have to stop thinking so narrowly and say, what content vehicle can we produce that can help us be successful? We have to think in terms of what can stop a competitor from being successful? What would a competitor do in the same or similar situation? And so to me, this is a genius idea, not from the standpoint that it's so unique, but from the standpoint that they chose to do it. This is being done in several other verticals, but for a high-end brand like this to do it, and it opened a lot of people's eyes. And it's not that it's particle physics; it's just a matter of somebody chose to execute a really good idea. And so, the only thing you'd have to do is to start searching the web and looking for, in your vertical, what types of content is shared most prominently. And then start producing some of that content. In many cases, it's not going to be a blog. It may not be an ebook, it may not be a white paper. It may be a simple Instagram snippet. It may be a simple screenshot. Like one of the things I've gotten to where I do is I use a funny picture, or what I think is a funny picture, and I put a little goofy caption around it. And that tends to get more reach than anything I think that would help market my business. So look for those types of content. And there's a bunch of different platforms. Miles offers one, Miles Content. Another one I really love, which I used for this, was BuzzSumo. And it's very simple. It's free. It's very easy to use. And all you're doing is plugging in a domain name or a vertical type, and then it'll pull up the types of most shared content in those verticals. And so it gives you some ideas. It gives you some fodder for here's how I should be thinking about content for my website, for my blog, for my social media posts that is already getting reach. And then as time goes on, you can further investigate, iterate, and say, okay, here's what I did last month. Here's how that performed. Let me try something different. But these are the ways that we have to begin to think to grow a community beyond the audience. Here's another. This is very simply what it's going to look like when you plug in a domain or an industry type. It'll show you the shares, the exact content, who's producing it, and it gives you some ideas. It opens your eyes. What I love about this is you don't have to be a content writer. You may say, hey, you know what? This was a blog post, but I'm going to do a simple little video snippet on my iPhone, or I'm going to write try to get a feature snippet. I'm going to just write an answer to a very specific question that was addressed in this blog. Those are the types of things I think we have to think about. That I like to say that in content marketing, online marketing, it's not that we can't be successful. A lot of times it's a matter of we're not choosing to do the things that will increase the likelihood of us being successful. And that's very, very frustrating to me as a strategist, because many times the things that I know or feel like will help a company be more successful sooner are just ideas companies refuse to execute. Not that it's so challenging. The other is invite contributions from the audience. And this goes back to that curated content. Miles has a blog of an audience that I run. It's the user-generated content blog. And what happens, it's so amazing for me because we have CEOs and CMOs and content people and SEOs producing this content that they're basically guest blogging on our website. And so we only pick the best of the best content. The great part about that's something you can do. No matter what your website, no matter what vertical you're in, you can find people who are producing content for other websites and ask for them to guest post on your website. Or you can say, hey, you know what, here's your idea. Would you mind if we repurpose it? You can rejigger it, change the text up a little bit, and post it on your website, providing a link back to the website. Most times people are very amenable to this. So all it takes is for you to identify pieces of content that will work on your website and you be a worthy enough domain. Not that you have great domain authority, but from the standpoint, you don't look like a website that would be spammy. And this is an idea that works very, very well for Moz, but it also can work very well for any business. And I've seen a lot of brands, not even those that I work with, do something very similar. So just take the time to identify brands who are producing content that would be beneficial to your audience. And that can help expand your community, because the people who found this content will likely come back to your website. Find it organically, will likely come back to your website. Again, another avenue is collaborate with non-competing brands. This is a blog I wrote for Salesforce. Another sales software company actually asked permission to repost it. And so I got a link to my website from Salesforce, but also to this brand. To the point I made earlier, this is something that's very easy to do. If you're finding great content that you're like, this writer may not want to write for me. Now, I probably would not have written for this second website. But when they reached out to the previous website, which had paid me to write this content, and say, hey, would you mind us posting this? That's beneficial to them. And so that's kind of like going from the B2C to the B2B. you should be coordinating better with the vendors around you, especially the non-competing, because it's a reciprocal relationship. If you're helping them, it's more likely they'll help you as well. And so this was a great example, I thought, of we should all be willing to collaborate with vendors, other brands around our vertical, or even in our vertical that aren't competing with us. The biggest point I want to make is, yesterday, or we continue to hear this 10X brand, and I know it sounds pretty highfalutin, but basically a synopsis it means is you're trying to be 10 times better. Whatever you produce, you want it to be 10 times better in some way. It could be 10 times, I don't like to say better, I like to say 10 times different. With content, making it better consistently becomes a very high hurdle for small brands, small businesses. It's a very high hurdle for even big brands when you look at it. Most content that's produced is not worthwhile when you're honest about it. But if you say, how can I make this meaningfully different in some way? One of the things to do is to steal, or borrow liberally, as I like to say, is find a piece of content that's executed well, but maybe not expertly. And you can provide some expert analysis on. And it could be just a video snippet. It could be in some form different, where you see this awesome sales presentation idea or this awesome marketing idea, and you say, hey, you know what? I have the in-house person who's an expert on that. I'm gonna do a blog, I'm gonna do a video, post it up on my blog, and then all of a sudden you can ask to share that because it's worthwhile and it's different. And so those are the types of things when we think about where we're trying to go with 10X. 10X is not going to be going anywhere. It's just like Content Shock from 2015. It's going to be around, and it's a thing, whether it's accurate or not, or whether we believe in it. It's significant to the extent that whatever we do, try to do it meaningfully different, or if you think about better, which I don't like, better in some way. Now, it doesn't have to be, 10 pages if it was only one page before, but think about doing it meaningfully different or better in some meaningful way. The example I love, this is one of my favorite marketers, Eric Inga, is to think about it in who's going to support your efforts. When we produce content, one of the biggest holes in content marketing is we can produce great content, but we don't have the audience to share it. And so what we have to think about before we produce any content is who's going to help us promote it. Most of the content I produced on my website in 2010, which I still think some of my better content, had 0 shares because I didn't have an audience. And so I focused on building an audience. So now, 3 years later, that was in 2013, 3 years later, that I have this sea of people who will share and promote it. So before I had an audience, and I realized that audience wasn't sharing my content because they wanted a community. Even though my Twitter followers were bigger, my Facebook followers were far more significant. But I wanted to shrink that landscape and say, who's actively invested in Ronell because I've actively invested in their brand or them. And so now I have so much further reach, even though my Twitter followers are smaller. I seldom use Facebook, seldom use Google+. I don't use social a great deal, but my community is vast, even though my audience is far smaller than a lot of other people. So that's what I think we have to go to be successful as content marketers. If we think beyond content, if we think beyond product or service, think beyond just the individual and think to community, but a passionate band of people. That's to me is the key to success. Ultimately, in the end, what makes a community significant, it's like the community we live in. I live in a community with maybe 200 homes, and it's amazing how activist the people are in that community. If somebody sees a dog roaming, it better be a dog in that community, or else they're saying, call the pound. And that's a great thing because it keeps people out. And so it provides a buffer. If somebody wants to sell their house, the people in that community get first dibs. Somebody wants to find a car or a babysitter, somebody in that community typically is the one providing it or providing input about it. And so what happens is that community fights for you. And an audience may look at you, but they're not actively invested in you. A community will fight for your business, fight for the survival of your business. And I think that's where we ultimately have to go. So, thank you. Questions?
I have a question.
Oh.
Obviously, you're creating content for yourself, and not just your clients, right? You're creating content for yourself. What do you do to market that?
Relationships. When you look at it, and this is something I began studying in 2013, you look at the Rand Fishkins, the Avinash Kaushik, the very, very prominent people. They started with a very, very small group. They started just producing content. They didn't focus on audience first. What happens is that community builds around them. even though the audience builds much faster, but a passionate community builds around them who will start sharing that content. In 2010, when I started working for myself, 2011, I started my own website. I had an audience because I was fairly new to content. And I cleaved to certain people, but what I realized is those people weren't invested in me because I wasn't invested in them. And so I totally took down everything. I said, I'm going to ignore what I've been doing. I'm only going to focus on producing great content, informing strong